Okay,
you're
now
you
if
guys are
Pulse and
all
Pulse
you
X is
guys
the
are all
biggest pair,
buzzing about ink burning your 0.22 fees, but when you're burning Pulse, you're technically burning your ink.
now the biggest pair is Pulse X and Pulse, correct? So imagine them bringing each other. This is using Hart's law at play. If the burn has something to do with it as well, you will see the pricing. If Pulse was to skyrocket or
Yeah, but okay, but
you
that
know,
doesn't matter about the
outpace
price.
Pulse
Forget about
X,
the price.
then
You're burning
I,
0.22% of fees.
you won't be
No,
burning.
you
You won't
are.
be. Listen,
V1
you
is
only
burning.
burn more
You're not
Pulse X
listening.
if
You're
the
just
price of
not
Pulse
doing the
X goes
math,
up,
bro.
right?
You're really not
I
doing the
know, but
math.
you
It's
only burn Pulse X if you.
0.22. Listen,
You
0.22 is burnt. But then one third of that is also burnt. The value is burnt, right? And
do
you're all like cheering for losing of one third of it, the same thing, because you're
so
getting
your
taxed on
Pulse X
everything.
has to
You're
raise in
you're
value for
losing. Listen, listen,
more
listen,
burn
listen,
to
listen,
happen,
listen,
right? Famous,
listen, listen. You're
famous,
losing.
famous.
You're losing
Wow.
0.22% of your fees, right? You lose it. It's gone. But you're also losing 0.07. So you're losing one third of what you lose. You lose one fourth in PLSX, and you lose three fourths in your fees. But just think about it. Just think about the outcome, and it's 1 to 3. Like, it's pretty funny.
What's going on, man? I just jumped in here. I hear you guys talking about the pulse burn.
He's basically saying the burn causes the ratio to change. He said it might can outpace it. It's a conundrum. I understand what he's saying, but then there's other points as well. It's just about burn and the percentage of the burn. So basically, post chain burning more than post X, and he's like, why hold post X and or ink when you there's post chain and post X to think about and speculate on.
That's a really good topic, actually. What was your argument?
Oh no, so basically he stated that the ratio, the burn has something to do with the ratio, and I was saying no, it doesn't. The ratio has something to do with the price, and vice versa. What I was saying is Pulse X would have to be higher in price for it to burn more than Pulse Chain.
No,
So
no,
right
no, you're
now
wrong.
it's
You're
not
wrong.
how.
If the price of Pulse X is technically higher, that means that the ratio would be much lower. So you would have 2 to 1. You would have two pulse for one.
What does the ratio have to do with the
But
burn?
too much of the Pulse X is being burnt because the DEX is being utilized
So
like
you get
crazy.
okay. Basically, what I'm saying is, imagine. Okay, say I'm saying so. Let's say up to 100,000 tokens get you is worth $100. 100,000 tokens later on would be let's say $10 thousand
No, no,
dollars.
no, no.
That burn is
Let's say
different, right?
you're doing $7 billion in transactions a day, and then your DEX is doing $7 billion in fees. Oh, sorry, $21 billion in fees, right? Because that's possible. I'm sorry, bro. The way that we're doing it and the way that we're gonna end up, if it comes in, we're gonna have a shitload of liquidity. We have $40 million of liquidity in one pool. Come on, I'm sorry. You guys don't see the numbers the way they're gonna become when real shit comes in. It's gonna go bonkers because they have so much liquidity. People could buy. They could get what they want. It's there, bro.
Let's talk about what's going to happen to this.
Okay,
No, I don't mean
so
to keep beating a dead horse, but the fees.
mathematically, the way I see it, right, is like, because we're 1 to 3 right now, we're at a point where we're using pulses, basically Pulse X. Pulse X is basically pulse. Why? Well, because it's highly liquid, right? So low volatility, and it's doing whatever the pulse is doing. So the ratio is going to be whatever it is. And what's happening? Well, we're burning more pulse than we are Pulse X, but we're burning as much Pulse X as we're transacting. But look at the transactions. I don't know, maybe the math of the transactions don't add up to what I'm saying, but if we end up doing, like, think about it like this: if there's $21 billion of transactions on the DEX and there's $7 billion in transactions, you're technically right now, you burn the same amount in dollars, because one burns 0.07% of the value and one burns 0.22%. And if you do the math, that's almost one. It's a tiny bit more than one third, right? Because it would have to be like zero point 0.3, it would have to be like 0.6 or whatever, but like it would have to be 7.0 something. But like the point is that you have this certain like coherence of the burn. Now if we start burning much more, and I mean not in terms of pulse, we have to look at the percentage of how much is being burnt comparison. So if it's outpacing it at a certain amount, well, then the ratio should be also at a certain amount, because we're valuing the utility of pulse more than we're valuing the utility of Pulse X. But if we end up lowering the price,
Value.
it causes this
Keyword.
effect where you're going to end up burning more Pulse X, because more Pulse X is going to be used in transactions, more Pulse X will be used in this blah 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 blah, and more Pulse X will be bought back to be burnt because the price of it is lower. But then you get this conundrum which I'm talking about, which is the same pulse, that one pulse can be used to buy that stupid Pulse X, and it can actually have more on the other side. So what do I mean? Well, okay, buyback, Pulse and Pulse X. Already have Pulse X, and you need Pulse to burn to get the Pulse X. Now, the normal thing that it will do is that you need to technically take back that Pulse X and put it back into Pulse to even out that number. So what does that mean? Well, that means you just got back the Pulse that you used to burn the Pulse X. So that means you can use the same Pulse to burn more Pulse X. So there's this conundrum, which is like, well, the more you lower the
What do
price.
you mean by burn? How you manually burning? What do you
Well, bro,
mean
you
by
cannot
burn? You
burn
mean
Pulse X without burning Pulse and or using Pulse. So the amount that you bought back in Pulse X to be burnt, then you're always gonna have the system put it back into Pulse to even out the pool, even if it's a micro.
Are you referring to the fee that costs to run the function?
It's just mathematically that's what should be done, is if it's 50-50, because if every buy, when you buy, there's a slippage, there's this, there's that, the pool to be even back to 50-50 or how it is, it will always go back and even it out. The math will always even it out. So the fact that you do the buyback burn means that you're taking an amount, you're buying it back, you're burning an amount, but that amount that you just burned was bought. Now you got to put back the pool, and the amount that you just used to buy back is just put back in the other side. So
okay,
you
but
can,
it's bought
you're
back
able to
exactly.
use
I
the
see what you
same
mean. I
pulse
see
to
what you mean.
burn more Pulse X.
But that pulse that they're buy okay, so they're okay. I get now. I get what you're saying now. That buyback and burn that they're using when they buy Pulse X, whatever they use to buy Pulse X, that gets sent into back into whatever circulating supply, right? So that basically benefits everyone that's
Not
providing
back in the
liquidity for
circulating
those
supply.
pairs.
It's in the pool because the pool needs to even
Yeah, in
out.
the pool of the
But
LP
then
providers,
the
in the LP
same pulse
providers.
that you just used to buy back that Pulse X, which is now poof gone, is you just put it back in the other side. So then one person could then again use the same pulse to go, even though you don't see it, but mathematically you're using the same pulse to burn more Pulse X. So it's like that's why I was saying we pulse, it's like a double spend. But then if the same pulse burns too much Pulse X, well, you gotta even it, the system will even it out by ratioing each other, and then you'll have more Pulse X being burnt, which will bring it back to itself. But it just means that we could technically, like right now, because it's highly liquid, the fact of moving these two prices outside of each other's bonding is very hard. But at one point, you could remove the bonding. Someone could just remove its bond and just be like, well, no, now it's not highly liquid no more, and everything you do to it affects it. So now do what you want. But I think right now, the way we
Imaginary
value it is
horrible
by the
thing.
burn. Because the
Uh-huh.
burn right now, without you realizing it, you're burning 3 times more by using Pulse than you are using Pulse X. When you use Pulse X, or when you're utilizing the utility of the DEX, the rewards is basically being burnt. So it's like you're getting rewarded off of the ratio because we're valuing it at a certain rate. Where it's like, yeah, we value Pulse more, but we'll just highly liquidify Pulse X, where it's like, well, it'll stay at the same ratio no matter what, because it burns itself at that rate. It'll just keep burning itself. But when we start burning more Pulse X because we don't we value more Pulse, it's like a never-ending
So
cycle where
what?
you're
So what are you
always
saying? What are you
burning.
saying
So
happens
it's a teeter
then?
tot upwards, up and to the right.
You have to draw a diagram.
I
See your
like where you're
brain.
going with it, though, famous. I
Yeah,
like
he
the way your
does.
brain works.
He's
And these
breaking
thoughts
it.
that hey guys, how's it going? These thoughts that famous right now has are very very important right now for everybody to understand. To go with the thought experiment and to maybe then put the price tag on Pulsechain and Pulse X, because that's exactly what famous is doing right now. He's trying to evaluate how much is Pulsechain worth, how much is Pulse X worth. Can I get some value out of there when ratio trading, for example? One thing that I heard you saying is, why would you buy Pulse X, right? Because maybe Pulsechain is so much more valuable. Well, then it could also go other directions where more Pulse X gets getting burned and so on. All I'm saying is these thoughts that I had with Hex, for example, right? I tried to put a price tag on Hex, and that helped me with my trading. And now Famous is doing the same thing, putting the price tag on Pulsechain, Pulse X. Those thoughts are very, very valuable. So let me ask you this, Famous. You have so far distinguished that when Pulsechain gets burned, Pulsex also get burned. Sometimes this gets more burned, sometimes Pulsex gets more burned, and therefore there should be like this ratio between each other, right? The only difference that I see is that Pulsex is so much lower in liquidity compared to Pulsechain. And I think here is like a little bit of a weak point in your argument, because I agree with you, these ratios will go up and down, and they will like impact each other, but it is also very important to look at the amount of liquidity and then see, okay, how much liquidity has Pulsechain, how much liquidity has Pulsex, because that is very important to then distinguish how many buyers, how many sellers we will have, because then at the end the buyers and sellers, they are the ones setting the ratios. The burning is, I think, a very good narrative, but at the end, it's always the buyers and sellers.
That I understand, but what I'm saying is the consequence of this burn and the way that it was created creates this effect where what we're doing now, I'm literally just thinking like, well, mathematically, what is happening? Okay. And there's something I learned about hex, which was really, really phenomenal by reading the code, which was every single hex has been created by 9.1 million Bitcoin or whatever the number was. And that created a certain amount of hearts, which was the original of all our hex. And all that hex that was originally created at first was then inflated every day. So what I mean is when you see Pulse, right? If we value more Pulse than Pulse X, then the same Pulse will always burn that Pulse, the different and more and more and more Pulse X. But if we value more Pulse X than Pulse, then it means that it would need more Pulse to burn that amount of Pulse X. But the way that things are going, and this is, it has to go this way. I don't know, see it otherwise, but the same Pulse will continuously burn this Pulse X. So we will eventually value Pulse more than Pulse X, but the consequence of that means that Pulse X will then be burnt more. So it's like mathematically saying like you can't get more hex by making more people stake their hex. You're gonna get less because you get more hex because people don't stake their hex. But that's the mathematical of it. That's the math. It's not the ethics. It's not the moral. It's not what we believe. It's not what the outcome of our community and what the outcome of the math will be. But if the math says that if more hex is not staked, then you receive more of the hex that is created. So that means that if we use more of the pulse to burn the pulse X, then we value more pulse X than we value pulse. But if we use the same pulse to burn always more and more pulse X, we're valuing pulse more than pulse X. And it's only because they're both working with each other.
Hold on, you just said the same thing twice. So you mean
No, yeah, because the pulse and
Pulse,
pulse X, man, it's annoying, man. Honestly,
Yeah, we know what you meant.
you can't get
right?
more hex. You could stake hex and get so much hex, but if more people stake, you get less hex because there's less inflation. The inflation daily is off of the total supply. But if everyone stakes their hex, you're only getting right. There's that chart, that famous chart, where if 1% stakes, then you get you know what I mean? You get the whole thing, and if 100% stakes, you get 3.69. Well, that's because that's the math. And the math of what's created right now with Pulse and Pulse X is we value right now Pulse more than Pulse X. But the thing is that Pulse X is so highly liquid that it's going to keep the same ratio of its burn because we're only burning Pulse X because we're valuing Pulse at that amount.
But then you also got to think there was more people that sacrificed for Pulse X than they did for Pulse
It doesn't
Chain.
matter. There's a
So with taking
percentage.
that into account,
But
there was a
that
lot of
also,
there was a lot of people that took their Pulse X and,
Yeah, but the
like
money
you
was
said,
never put in.
burnt
But the
it to
money
go
was
get
never put in,
Pulse.
so it doesn't matter. The people and the users doesn't matter. What I'm talking about is the potential of what is the
So you're
outcome.
talking ratio. I'm talking about the
But the rate.
ratio. We're talking
But
about
the
ratio here,
ratio,
right? You
think
want to
about it.
bring the
If you
ratio in
think
here.
that Pulse and Pulse X are when it's 1-to-1 means that they're both valued the same, then you just don't understand ratios. You just look at price.
no,
I
I
don't
don't
think it
think
would
so
ever get
either.
to 1-to-1.
Okay, I'm telling you, if we end up burning more
It,
Pulse X than we do Pulse, then you'll see that ratio where it costs more. If one Pulse X, it would cost you that much Pulse because it's valued that much. But the fact that we value Pulse more than Pulsex is the reason why you have this ratio. But the fact that it's highly liquid, you don't see the ratio going. We're not selling our Pulsex.
Yeah, you're
In
right,
Pulse.
because there was a lot of people that sacrificed for Post X that wanted to
But that's just
value
the
hold
excuse. The
hold
math
chain.
that has nothing to do with the math. That's the excuse. That's the kumbaya. That's the emotion. I'm saying
But you're
mathematically.
still connecting it to burn. You're still. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah, but
stop.
most
That's why I'm
people don't
like,
believe in it, and one
what's the
person
math with the
starts
burn?
burning more pulse.
How does the
Anyways, man,
math with
because you
the
don't
burn?
understand. You don't have to
I
use
mean, because I
pulse.
can't talk.
No, but you just don't
Look,
get it.
I can't
You
talk.
don't have to use pulse, and you don't have to use pulse X to burn pulse X.
Maybe famous. You might want to cap that one to yourself. That seems like a pretty good. You're onto something there. If the price of Pulse PLS went to a penny, which is where that's close to what 100x from where we're at right now,
Yeah, but that's insufficient.
90
Like
or
the
whatever it is.
price.
The cost of a transaction would also be 100x
No,
higher because we're still paying the same
no,
amount on
no,
average.
no, 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 no. So the last time I checked, Ethereum did a 14,000x, and we're kind of paying the same transactions I paid back in 2016, 17. Actually, we're paying just a
Because the
tad more.
GUI went down. The GUI.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
saying
also
if the
Well, the
GUI was
GUI is the
exactly
same.
the
The GUI
same.
is the same.
Well, there was a fork also, and there's like probably two forks in
No,
between
no, no,
them
no,
now
no.
and
So
then.
my price in Ethereum has stayed almost. It's a bit more, man. Like I'd say tripled or quadrupled the price. I've done it. I went back just to see and laugh, and I'd be like, "Oh shit, I didn't pay." It says the price.
All right. In what
Telling
world
you.
then? Let me ask you this. And I know it sounds like I'm saying it's bad, but I'm not. And
But
I'll get to my point in a minute. In what world though? Do we see 1 cent hex? And we don't see crazy high fees. If the price is still $1,000 pulse to do
okay, but 1 cent hex for how much liquidity?
to clear your farm.
But how much liquidity? Because like, man, I wouldn't even let you finish the question because it's like,
What does that matter? I'm talking about transactions, not liquidity. That has nothing to do with liquidity.
well, you're saying 1 cent
What
hex.
does
the
it cost to do a
price has
transaction?
something to do with liquidity. I'm confused where you guys are.
If Pulse went to a penny, we would have really high transaction per dollar fees. This is just math. You
The
like
volume?
math?
No,
You mean the volume?
It
No,
could, it could
okay.
lower it.
Hypothetically, if the cost was a thousand a pulse to yield your farm, I assume most people are doing farms. If it was it cost you around 1,000 pulse to get your yield, sell it, whatever. In the future, the price of pulse is a penny, but it's still 1,000 pulse.
You know
No,
what? Let
no,
me
it'd be
just
like that.
debunk the conundrum.
It
How do
should
you
be
No, I'm
way
equate?
saying in
down.
theory. You got to follow me here. You got
Yeah, no,
in
I
theory.
Don't,
definitely
because
get you,
guys,
but
I don't
it
follow
goes
you
down.
because
So
this is the inexperience. How do the fees drop 100x right now and the price drops? How does that make sense?
I'm not saying the fees are going down. I'm saying
no, so
if
basically,
there's no
Angel,
surprises, the fees are
you're
going up.
basically saying once the price goes up in value, so that 1,000 PLS right now is worth what, like 50, like 10 cents. That ten
Right.
cents, it will
Okay.
take the price of 10 cents, and it will calculate how many PLS when PLS is at a penny, and it will give you maybe it'll be 100 PLS now. So it'll go from 1,000 to 100. Now to farm, it would be 100 PLS, or maybe even cheaper PLS
Wait,
units.
you're
It will
saying
go down to the
that's how it's
units.
set up right now?
That's how it is, yes. Because when ETH came
Oh,
out, I
okay.
remember it was like 2, 3 ETH, like 1, 2, 3 ETH to make a transaction. Now it's less than that. But
So
even
there's
though the price
okay.
is still the same.
So this is where I was actually taking this. I didn't look into this much. I literally didn't look into it at all because I assumed that obviously that's a big problem and people were yelling about it early. Obviously this was thought about, and when he multiplied the validators, when he gave the validators extra, the last fork of V4, when the validators got so much extra to incentivize them to come play over here in Pulsechain instead of Ethereum. When he did that, it made the fees go through the roof because the validators were getting paid a lot. And what I assumed would happen would the validators would get paid less in Pulse, but their Pulse would be worth a lot more. There go, our fees would remain about the same, which is exactly what you're saying. It sounds like that's already programmed. Like I said, I didn't look, but is that what you're saying? That's how it works already.
Well, yeah, the gas price, yes. If you're talking about the gas,
I'd like to see the part of the code that shows that when the price goes up, the validators get paid less.
well, the
Question mark.
they don't dollar value. They don't get paid less. They
No,
get
not
paid.
dollar value. Pulse value. Less Pulse.
Oh, I mean, yeah, yes, they would
Oh,
be.
okay. Well, that's good. Then there's not even a freaking issue then.
Why would they
It
get
doesn't.
paid
It doesn't
less?
even
Why
matter.
would they get paid less?
Units.
They would get paid less Pulse units. Yes, units.
Well, no. If
Perfect.
people are willing, if the consensus is willing to pay more, then we're gonna pay whatever the it is. If you're gonna click the accept button, whoever clicks the accept button affects what the next person's gonna pay.
So famous. Are we still paying? Are we still paying 1 ETH to get for gas right now?
But we should, but by
Or like
your
before?
guys' logics, we should be.
No, by my logic, we shouldn't be, because that's what
Oh, I
happened
would
with
say
ETH.
that would never happen. It's not, nobody would do that. You're right. It's a good point. Nobody would pay that.
But it just doesn't. But if people are willing to pay it, they will.
But they won't. So same
Are
thing.
you willing
So
to
same
pay?
thing.
Who in this room is willing to pay an ETH to do a swap?
Guys, why do you think it already costed 1 ETH for someone? Because they paid it.
They did.
Oh, by the way, I'm talking about
I'm
1
not.
ETH back when it started, right? When
No.
ETH, yeah, it was one.
No.
Yes, it was. I seen gas
When
go up.
I know. I remember it being lower. It was still fractions. I don't remember ever seeing an ETH.
I
I've
seen
never
1
paid
ETH
an ETH.
before
I don't
because
think.
ETH was not that high. I've seen $100 gas transaction that was ETH when
But
it was 100,
you guys both brought something interesting to me that I never thought about, and I never looked at it to see because I'm building stuff on top of it. So I'm not looking at building a blockchain. And
yeah, no, but it does.
But if that's how that works, and I don't know. I'm just saying. I think you're assuming.
I understand what he's saying.
It
Like,
does.
yeah, it's a competitive.
But if that's not how it works now, it will in the future. Like he can do that. I know that.
So right now for a transaction, I'm paying like I overpay, right? Like 1.2 million beats. I'm doing it something like this, and then sometimes I try to cut the cost and I put it down to 1 million, for example. So in the future, when Pulsechain is worth a lot, people will try to pay as least fees as possible, you know, and they try to put down this number. Right now, nobody cares because it's so cheap, so you just overpay, you know. But in the future, when it's more expensive, you just try to put it down more and more and more, just because now you value it more.
Because per unit is very, very cheap. We're at 4 zeros and a 1 for 1 PLS. So the more one PLS gets expensive, then the gas will start countering itself and the units will go down to a fraction out of the dollar value of what the gas is. So that's what we're saying.
But is that how it works though, or you just?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's not like coded that the validators get less. It's just an economic law. When a resource gets more expensive, people start to hesitate to use it. So people will hesitate to mash aggressive and add 100 to their tip every time. If the price of Pulse 10x's, they'll be theoretically 10x more hesitant to do that.
Oh, so you're saying the system itself, just basic economic law, is what balances that. It doesn't need to be programmed because the market will determine, just like the price chart, that as well. That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense.
If everyone is paying the same amount and it's not enough because everyone is paying it, then someone will pay more to make the transaction happen because no one's transactions will happen. That's what happens when.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a law like no one will be allowed to pay more, but many people will not pay. They'll say, oh, well, maybe I won't harvest and compound every day. Now I'll just do it.
And maybe they would because maybe they want to get faster transactions. They want to go straight through.
I mean, see, we see it already in the real world, right? With Ethereum, in the bull market, the fees are high. In the bear market, the fees are always low. So I think that's like a market law, basically, just the market participants deciding on what is the social consensus on the fees.
There's two equations there. It's the price of Ethereum, also with the price of Gwei, the cost per transaction.
Well, everyone do the same transaction at the same time because you're all trying to do the same thing. It's not going to go, and there's only going to be so many people doing it, and the system will not allow you. Therefore, you will have to then pay more to then go and do it because you will front run the other person, and then their transaction won't work. The reason why your transaction doesn't work when it's too low is because, oh, look at that. The system, you ever see that on MetaMask where it changes and it goes up? Why did it go up? It's because someone just paid that. So that means that you need to pay that to be with him or even in line. That's the system. That's the
market.
Computational
That's the market.
power. That's what I'm telling you guys is that if you pay 1 ETH to go unstake, or if you pay 1 ETH to go send 1 ETH, then if everyone wants to pay that, then everyone's gonna pay that or have to pay that. But the reason why it's not 1 ETH is because, like Bob's saying, no one's gonna pay an ETH to send an ETH.
I was never worried about the price of PLS or the price of a transaction on PLS ever being crazy high. But there are, believe it or not, there are still a lot of people that don't understand that that's not going to happen. Pulse will never be as expensive as ETH. It'll never let that happen.
Why wouldn't you want that?
You guys like paying $20 to do a swap?
Doesn't mean that it might do that.
I really like paying $500. If you're paying like half a cent now and you end up paying $5 later on and someone comes to you and says it's expensive, you'll be like, well, yeah, man, it's what it is because everyone's on it. It's very simple. You can go on etherscan.io and go look at the distribution of ETH throughout the wallets, and you can understand that it's very fair what you're paying. Very, very fair, because they don't give a shit and they're not active. Because if it's up to them and they start transacting, the system's going to say, yeah, you could pay half an ETH, because everyone out there can pay half an ETH, and they'll pay half an ETH because they're paying half an ETH because all you guys want to do something.
That's some interesting stuff you're talking about, though. Like with the whole, it's like a whole other area of the blockchain.